Hello, and welcome to Small Talk about the Big Issue. I'm Kiara.
And I'm Lorraine. And we are thrilled to start this series of episodes on the ocean. It's so key to understanding how the climate works independently of climate change, but it's also such a vital part of understanding climate change, how it works, what solutions we may have. It's been this kind of background feature of a lot of our previous episodes, but there's never been a kind of place where I could insert just how important it was. And so I'm really happy that we're dedicating not just one, but multiple episodes to discuss just how much the ocean controls the climate in a way. I don't think that's an overstatement.
No. Actually, what you said made me want to quote Sir David Attenborough, who this year said that after almost 100 years on the planet, he now understands that the most important place on Earth is not on land, but at sea. And I think there's so much truth in that statement, and we're very excited to explore what he meant through all these episodes.
Yes, we are.
So you probably entered this episode thinking, well, I know the sea level is rising. We've heard it for quite some time now, and we all know why. The ice is melting, there's more water in the oceans, the levels rise. But is there anything new we can teach you today? And I think the answer is yes.
I know the answer is yes.
I will start by, maybe making sure that we all stand on the same ground when it comes to why the ocean is rising, because it's not as simple as you think it is. And of course, answering the question that probably led you to this episode, which is, how fast is the sea level actually rising? And then Lorraine has picked, I'm sure, a really interesting article.
It is. I'm so excited. I think I wanted to show just how universal this issue of sea level rising is, not just for people who are living by the coastlines. And I chose this article that bridges culture and science and how sea level rise is also affecting some of our precious cultural sites.
Which I think is a very important point to make. Let's get started on the science and finish with culture, both being very important. So it's not a secret that what's driving sea level rise is the melting of glaciers and ice sheets. The main contributors to that rise are the Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet. Both hold phenomenal amounts of water in their ice. I wanted to talk a bit more about the Greenland ice sheet because, as you may or may not know, the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. And that's a problem because the Greenland ice sheet contains around 7% of the world's fresh water. That's around 2.5 million cubic kilometers of water.
Oh, wow.
So should it all melt, just to give you an idea, it would lead to a global sea level rise of 7.4 meters, which is very hard to imagine and hopefully will not happen at all. But the Greenland ice sheet already contributes to 20% of the current sea level rise. And it's disappearing 4 times as fast as it was 20 years ago in 2003. And it's not only a problem because it leads to the disappearance of ecosystems for animals such as the polar bear or the walrus, but also because it increases the warming of the planet. This is because of how dark surfaces absorb a lot more light than white surfaces do. White surfaces typically reflect the solar radiations back into space. And oceans, for example, which are a lot darker than sea ice, will absorb that solar radiation, which leads to warming inside of the ocean. So every bit of ice and snow that is melting in the Arctic is being replaced by the ocean, which is able to absorb and accumulate a lot more heat. The more ice is melting in the Arctic, the more warming is triggered in the sea and in the atmosphere, because more solar radiations get trapped in our atmosphere.
Simply because parts of the Earth are changing color and are becoming darker.
So not only is the atmosphere warming through that, but the oceans warm as well, which of course increases the melting. Now, if we kept going like we do, it would take around 1,000 years, most scientists say, before all of Greenland ice disappears. However, there's one frightening possibility that I wanted to mention, and it's called the Greenland ice sheet collapse. This is what's called a climate tipping point. In a nutshell, a tipping point is a threshold, a climatic threshold that, if crossed, could lead to dramatic and unpredictable consequences. And scientists have decreed that it could happen as early as 2050 with our current emissions. So that's something we really want to avoid, because the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet would lead to a 7.5 meter increase in sea level.
So the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet is the entirety of the ice sheet melting?
Mm-hmm. It would be that it goes beyond a point of no return, which means that the system will enter a state that is unpredictable and will probably lead to accelerating unpredictable changes, which means that we're not even able to predict how fast it's going to melt, because nothing like this has happened in a really long time.
Okay, I understand.
But it would lead to an acceleration of the melting, and the full melting of the Greenland ice sheet could happen a lot earlier than in year 3000. Could happen as early as 2050.
Mm-hmm. Which sounds like a long time on a human scale, but on a planetary scale and an evolutionary scale, it's the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So it would really destabilize a lot of coastal ecosystems, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. So up until now, the melting of ice from glaciers and ice sheets was causing 2/3 of sea level rise. Now, you might be wondering what's the other cause? I think you might know of it already, Lorraine.
I don't think I do. I mean, no, actually, I do.
You do.
I'll let you explain.
I would be surprised if you didn't. It's the principle of thermal expansion.
Yeah.
Simply put, it just means that when the water in the ocean gets warmer, it takes up more space. And this is a phenomenon that's not to be underestimated. In fact, when doing research for this episode, I stumbled across very concerning news. In 2024, as you might know, we had a year of record high ocean temperatures. And that year, thermal expansion reached an all-time high. And during that year, it actually caused 2/3 of the sea level rise. We always thought that ice melting meant the sea level was rising and this was the main cause, but now we're actually seeing that the expansion of the water due to the heat stress is the leading factor of sea level rise. Of course, I think you want to hear the answer to the question of the episode, which is, how fast is the sea level rising right now? Well, if you had asked us this maybe 20, 30 years ago, we would have said the sea level is rising around 2.1 millimeters a year. Now, in the last decade, this has gone up to 4.77 millimeters a year.
Oh, wow.
So only in the span of 30 years, the rate of sea level rise has more than doubled.
Yeah.
And predictions are that by 2050, it's projected to rise by 30 centimeters.
It's one of those numbers, and I feel like this is quite common in climate change research, which when you say a few millimeters a year, it doesn't sound like a lot, but actually the consequences would be a lot.
Of course, there's a lot of territories that are way below 1 meter of sea level rise, a lot more than you'd think. There's actually a really good website I would recommend you go look at right now or after this episode, which is called Flood Maps at firetree.net, and it can show you, it's a dynamic map which shows you which parts of the world will be below the water at different levels of sea level rise.
Oh, this is really interesting, yeah.
So it's an interesting tool to experiment with. And if we didn't do anything about our carbon emissions, if the warming kept increasing as fast as it does now, researchers have predicted that if we experience global warming of around 4.4 degrees, we would see a sea level rise of about 2 meters by 2100. So that would still be in our lifetimes, 2 meters. I checked. Most of the Netherlands would be gone.
And also, it's not just about sea level rising. It's also, that also comes with greater frequencies of extreme coastal events, of floods. So it turns into this multiplication of issues.
And this is also an issue that will not be even. Not everyone lives in coastal areas. Right now, there's around 680 million of people living in low-lying coastal areas. About almost 2 billion people live in half of the world's megacities that are coastal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is bound to have really strong impacts as early as the end of the century if we don't do anything to dramatically change our emissions and reduce global warming.
Mm-hmm. That's some tough news.
So this would be by the end of the century, but, you know, hopefully humankind will live a little bit longer than that, and it's good to think long term as well.
Mm-hmm.
Studies have shown that in 2300, so in about 300 years, if we keep on going business as usual, we will reach between 7 to 14 degrees of global warming, which is a number I can't even start to wrap my head around.
Mm-hmm.
But this would mean that the sea level would rise by about 7 meters. But that is without taking into account the Greenland ice sheet collapse, which could bring it to a staggering 15 meters.
Okay, this is really dramatic news, and I know that there are ways that we can protect ourselves by building dams, etc., but is there a way to stop the ocean rising?
Well, to stop the ocean rising, you would have to stop both thermal expansion and ice sheet melting. The common factor for both of these events is the warming atmosphere. And right now, the easiest solution would be to stop releasing greenhouse gases, because that is the main factor driving global warming. I'm sorry if this is too simple of a solution, but that's it. I mean, it would be very hard to find a scientist who doesn't agree on that.
Yeah, and I think it's good in some ways that the solution's so simple. We need to focus on cutting down carbon emissions.
Yeah. So this was my scientific part. Lorraine, I'm all ears for the cultural aspects of the sea level rise.
Okay, what we've discussed so far, I hope makes it very clear what the impacts of sea level rise will be. This is a global issue, as we've discussed before, that we will all be impacted by. But I want to add another layer to the way that we will be impacted by sea level rise, and one that's really universal. I want to demonstrate that regardless of where we live, everyone is concerned by sea level rise. And the article that I've chosen demonstrates just how much we have to lose beyond our immediate needs in health and safety, just in case these weren't convincing enough.
Yeah.
And so this article is titled, African Heritage Sites Threatened as Sea Level Rise Accelerates.
Okay.
And it was published by a team of scientists from Africa and Europe, led by Michaelis Voskoutas. And what they did is that they looked at 284 coastal heritage sites in Africa. So these are both cultural heritage sites and natural heritage sites.
Do you have any examples of those?
Yes, these are sites like the Aldabra Atoll in the Seychelles Islands. It's the world's second largest coral atoll.
Wow.
So this has kind of natural significance, but is also one of the great wonders of nature. It has implications for tourism, the economy, etc. Another example is the Kite Bay Citadel in Egypt, which is the ancient site of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The archaeological site of Carthage in Tunisia. So these are places that I read about as a child. I studied in history class. And so even though I've never been to these places, I feel very strongly that they're important. They're of cultural importance, to us as a global community, but also locally, these places have huge significance for both history and cultural identity. Now, it's not just me who thinks that these places are important. They're recognized as sites of outstanding universal value by organizations like UNESCO. So what the authors did is that they created the first continent-wide geospatial database of these 284 coastal heritage sites. So they looked at the entire African coastline, all 300,000 kilometers of it. They looked at how exposed these heritage sites are and will be to coastal flooding and erosion, depending on emission scenarios. So they mostly compared 2 emission scenarios, a kind of moderate emission scenario where we keep trying to cut our emissions, but maybe we're not hugely successful because we still reach about 2 to 4 degrees warming in total, with a peak in 2040, and a kind of worst case scenario where we keep doing business as usual and we reach 3 to 5 degrees warming, potentially more depending on the source.
And so this geospatial database, as you called it, allowed them to see the effects of that warming on flooding events at those specific areas.
Yes, on flooding events. So they looked at things like sea level, waves, tides, storms, but also erosion, because that will also potentially damage these heritage sites.
Okay.
And so they looked at two things. The first is the number of sites that are or will be exposed to a 1 in 100 year events. And then the second is the area of those sites that would be potentially exposed. And they're using this as a proxy to kind of look at the overall effect that sea level rise would have on coastal hazards and then the kind of damage it would inflict to these heritage sites.
Could you clarify what a 1 in 100 year coastal extreme is?
So I feel like we've discussed in other episodes that the problem about climate change, and I think this very much applies to sea level rise, is not just that the sea level is rising, but is that we're increasing the frequency of these natural disasters. And so in this case, 1 in 100 year events, say, is a storm that we'd expect to see only once in 100 years if the climate were not deregulated. But we're going to start seeing them a lot more. And so these will damage, obviously, our food systems, our economy, other natural environments. But this article focused on the cultural heritage that it would potentially damage or destroy.
Which is worth highlighting.
I thought very much so. And so what they found...
what did they find?
Yes. And so what they found is that currently about 56 of those 284 sites, which doesn't sound like a lot, but again, is 1 in 5, are at risk from one of these 1 in 100 coastal extreme events. And on average, each site has about 4.5% of its area exposed, with quite a few having a lot more than that. So potentially being very damaged or degraded by these coastal extreme events.
And these coastal extreme events are predicted to happen more often than just once in the century.
Yes. Okay. And as you mentioned, there's some geographical inequality here where North and West Africa have the largest number of exposed sites. But the number of exposed sites changes and increases depending on the emissions scenario. So under the moderate emissions scenario, by 250, almost 200 of these sites become threatened by coastal extreme events. Under high emissions, that number exceeds 200 exposed sites.
Which is basically nearly all of the ones that they looked at, because there were 284. 200 is quite a big majority.
Yes, so you're right. I hadn't even fully computed how much of a majority that would be. And then in the second half of the century, regardless of the emission scenario, what would happen is a sharp increase in the exposed area of these heritage sites.
So this time it wouldn't rather be about the frequency about the events, but maybe the intensity of the events. They would afflict more space.
So I think it's not linked to the level of extreme of the events. Arguably, you're right, these events will become more extreme. It's just these heritage sites, because of where they are, will be more impacted. Potentially, as you said, most of them will be impacted. But they'll be more and more impacted with time, even though the number of impacted sites won't increase because pretty much all of them will be impacted. So say if you take the Quate Bay Citadel or the Aldabra Atoll, maybe a certain part of them will be impacted under a certain emission scenario. So for example, the Citadel, maybe only the first floor will be impacted.
Yeah.
But as sea level rises more and more, that same site, maybe the second floor will be impacted, maybe the third floor.
I get it. Yeah. So it's, again, not about frequency, but about the proportion of the site which will be affected by these events.
Exactly. It's the proportion of the site. And so, for example, under moderate emissions, an average of 11.2% of the area of a site will be exposed by 2100, which is over 16,000 kilometers square. Again,
Wow.
We're just quantifying cultural sites. Cultural sites are often surrounded by human activity, linked to economy, but also linked to cultural identity.
Yeah, we're only looking at a facet of a problem, but there's a lot more people involved.
Yes. If we don't manage to cut our emissions as much and we reach this high emission scenario, an average of 13.7% of each heritage site will be exposed by 2100.
So that's an increase of around 4,000 square kilometers.
Exactly. It's 21,000 kilometers. Yeah.
That relies on just how much we release. That's how much power we hold.
I think that's exactly what I wanted to finish with. This episode has been quite heavy. There's a lot of bad news, and we'll get to good news in our ocean unit.
We promise.
But but the point that I think this article really demonstrated is that we have lost so much already, and I think that's been very clear from your introduction, Kiara, but there's still so much that we can save and should save, and these heritage sites are one example that I think we can all relate to, and that's why this article was so impactful to me.
I agree. And I think it's also something that can bring a lot of people together, because there's a lot of different reasons to fight against climate change. And I think protecting cultural heritage might be something that someone listening to this podcast might be particularly passionate about. So it's all about picking your cause and fighting for that. Because in a world where a lot of things feel like they're going wrong, all that matters is to take one step into the right direction. And to quote another of our inspirational heroes, and maybe a little bit as a tribute to Jane Goodall, who sadly passed away a few days ago, she was the one to claim that hope lies in action. It's not only about sitting back and hoping for a change, it's actually about being the change, and that's how you create hope. And I think that's a great motto to live by, something we can all strive to do. But I think it was great of you to highlight that in addition to the dramatic consequences on human lives and safety, and also the loss of biodiversity that will be triggered by the sea level rise that we will face in case we don't reduce our carbon emissions, it's also very important to highlight the cultural losses that will result from it. It's probably a perspective that is not really considered much, and definitely worth highlighting. I'm really glad you picked that article.
Thank you. And I think it's something that we can all identify with as well, because these are African heritage sites. But I know of lots of other sites in, France, our home country, that are by the sea that would be similarly threatened. I also wanted to make the point that while this is another reason to fight climate change and to be involved and to take action, as you say, I think that fight should not be human-centered. We need to fight for our own survival, but we also need to fight, for the planet that we live on, and ecosystems that we're destroying deserve to be saved, quote unquote, beyond their importance to us humans.
Yes, beyond the use we have for them, but just by existing, they deserve to be preserved. It's very philosophical. It might be time to introduce next week's topic:
ocean acidification.
We'll see you then. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email at smalltalk.bigissue@gmail.com. Until then, stay tuned. Goodbye. We fact-checked this episode, but we have nothing to add. So see you next time.